So, welcome to the Book Me Health channel. Today, we've got an exciting episode with Sarah Lambert, where we're going to delve deep into the causes and the solutions relating to grief, depression, trauma, low self-esteem, addiction, and much more. So, Sarah is a registered therapist with a master's in clinical counselling. And I will be asking her questions to give us a better understanding of also what counseling is and also compared to what therapy is at the same time. So, Sarah, how about we start with a small introduction from you? What is therapy and counseling to you?
So, very good question, Lars. So, it feels to me that therapy and counselling is about finding who you truly are. I think many of us go through life just doing the best we can with what we've got available to us. Sometimes we can shape shift and do things that we think are more socially acceptable. But really, therapy is about peeling back those onion skin layers and looking at what is making me happy? What is my purpose? What am I not saying yes to or not saying no to in my life? And what obstacles are getting in the way of me being organically me?
So let's start off with asking the tough questions for the audience. What a lot of people say that they don't feel bad enough to get therapy or help. What would you say to those people that don't feel bad enough to make that step?
It's such a common thing. And just to know that, from personal experience before I started my counselling training as well, part of the reason I became a therapist is because I had such a great life-changing experience going through therapy. And for a long, long time, I thought, no, I can get by. And I think, very often it can be a self-worth thing where we think, no, that's far too much money to spend on myself. Really it's an investment into your well-being. And sometimes we might not be aware of what's unresolved underneath the surface. I could just see that from my experience, there were things coming out sideways in relationships with others. And just that general sense of tackling the root cause of that, looking at what that's about, can really help to unlock such a freedom. So, really thinking about the coping mechanisms that we can have. Sometimes we can think, well, I've had a really bad week, and to make myself feel better, I'm going to go to the shop and buy this and that. And then very quickly, we can end up spending an amount on ourselves to try and make ourselves feel better that we might get that kind of dopamine fix in the moment, but then it wears off very quickly. Whereas we can invest that money into therapy and have that as that tool for developing the skills that will be there for life then.
I'm curious about you because you said that you started your therapy journey, or let's say tried to speak to somebody after you noticed that your relationships were going sideways, I think were your exact words. That's pretty, you had to be pretty in tune with yourself to make that decision. What forced you to make that step?
I think seeing that there were repeating patterns, and I thought, hang on, what's this all about? And it was my relationship with rejection. And so I would put coping mechanisms in place, and I would, act in a certain way that I felt kept me safe, but actually it was damaging me, harming me. And so actually looking at washing out the wound meant that it was no longer infected, to use that analogy, that whilst the wound is there and it's infected, it's kind of dictating how you live your life. And very often I'd feel controlled by that. And it was actually really empowering to tackle it head on, look at that, wash out the wound, and then stop it holding me back in other areas.
It's funny because most people say or have this feeling or sensation of feeling stuck. Um, what do they really mean when they're saying I'm feeling stuck from your point of view as a therapist or a counselor?
For me, it feels like it's a sense of existing, just waking up, going through the motions, doing the things I have to do, I feel obligated to do. Even the things that maybe once brought me joy, they don't in the same way, and there can be a real sense of feeling lost in the world. And that's about, again, thinking that question, what am I not saying no to, or what am I not saying yes to? Gabor Mate is an amazing mind in the field of psychotherapy, and that's something he encourages us to have that compassionate inquiry for. And, we can feel stuck sometimes where we might have a situation where we don't have a great deal of control over that. But therapy can really help to bring about a degree of autonomy then. It's not that the therapist is an expert in any way, it's about empowering the individual to realise they know their world better than anybody else. So who best to walk alongside and help them to, see the wood for the trees, to uncover what their solution is, rather than somebody who's met them maybe in one session and is saying, this is what you should do. That isn't what therapy is. It's about empowering the individual to find those solutions for themselves.
That's really interesting that you described the feeling stuck as being like you're just existing. And one of the positive steps that you can take is to go speak to somebody, a therapist, or get help in some form. What are some of the negative behaviors that people that you treat fall into when they're feeling stuck?
So very often in that stuck space, it's a space I don't want to be in, but I've got to make the best of it. And by saying no to that organic part of myself, who wants to say, I want to do this instead, but can't, then we develop coping mechanisms to cope with that.
Mm.
Sometimes that can be addiction. We find things that to do the best we can with the situation. So it might be that at the end of a day, you find yourself having a drink to take the edge off to, I've been stressed all day. It's a way to quickly relax because I haven't got much time, I haven't got time for self-care, but this is a way that I can do that. And sometimes, that's fine for people. And sometimes there can become a bit of a dependency on that. And the relationship with alcohol can then actually be something that isn't serving them. And, really looking into addiction, it's something that in the end can start to control us, where in the beginning it started off as something to help me get by. But when it's not serving you any longer and it's actually the thing that you're being controlled to do, then that is something that we can look at in therapy. It's about, really understanding that the way the brain works, it doesn't remember the low that you get with the hangover the day after. It remembers the kind of the dopamine fix that you got in the moment when you first took that drink.
What are some addictions that people brush off that might indicate they need some other help or more, let's say, pressing help?
It's a really good question. I think, if we look at daily life, there are so many things that are socially acceptable to do. I suppose addiction is defined as that thing that you do because it's something that you felt helped you at one point, but then it's taken over your life a little bit. It's starting to control you. And I wonder if we think of that, whether it's unhealthy relationships that we find that we are stuck in, that we can't find ourselves getting out of, or whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling. There's all sorts of things that help us to cope in the moment. But when they start to take over us, there's that real sense again of feeling stuck.
You've got a friend, you're starting to get signals that are concerning to you. How do you approach them that they might need help from a third person?
So I think approaching that with compassion, empathy, and understanding is so important. We all have the best of intentions, but the delivery can make a big, big difference. So, especially with the stigma that's still unfortunately there to an extent, where that, in the past it was assumed that there was something wrong with you almost if you went for therapy. And it's not that at all. It's not that you're broken. It's not that you're faulty. It's that you're human. You're going through something that is a lot of adversity, and anybody else in your situation would need support. So, thinking about your question there, Lars, it feels like somebody saying, I really love you, I really care about you, and I'm noticing that you're not yourself lately. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that? And it's allowing them the space to share what they've been going through. And there might be quite a relief actually for that person and thinking, wow, they've seen that. You
Mm.
know, many people can mask a lot of what they're going through and kind of drift through life and just slapping on that smile and hoping for the best. But to actually be seen is very, very powerful. And if they've got a platform where they can share with that close friend or family member what they're feeling and have that person not judge it and just really hear it with warmth and empathy, and then say, well, you know, I'm really pleased that you've shared that with me. And it breaks me to know that you've been going through that alone. How about we look for other ways that you can get some support and then kind of open the door to suggesting therapy in that way?
What does it actually feel like as a therapist to be in a room with somebody that finally or eventually is unburdening themselves of pain, trauma, childhood issues, or whatever? How does it feel as a therapist to witness that?
Feels like an incredible privilege to see that somebody feels comfortable to do the thing that is what they've needed to do all along, you know, and it's incredible to witness where you see that somebody is actually unraveling and you know, unraveling in a good way, where they've been having to glue themselves together, put plasters over these wounds for so long that actually in allowing themselves that permission to really connect with the pain, you can even see physical symptoms of, you know, just a shifting in, there's less tension in the body, you know, you can see the relief in the face as well. And very often people might not know necessarily what to say in a session, and that's fine. You know, we can kind of work together and unpick what those things are. And sometimes it might be that the floodgates come down and it's a steady stream of all of these words that have wanted to be said but haven't had the space to be heard.
What do you say to somebody that you really feel like they're on the edge of opening up, but are just not?
Think anything you can do to just truly see them. So even put into them that, you know, I see that you look distressed and what's that about? And knowing that actually sometimes the less we say, the better. It's not about, you know, we can feel compelled to try and fix and solve the problem because as human beings, we don't like to see other people in pain. And very often, you know, loved ones who mean well, they might dive in to do that, or they might kind of try and minimize, gloss over the situation the person's going through, or say, well, you know, you've got this going on in your life that's really, really good. And then that makes that person feel awful that, oh gosh, now I feel like I ought to be feeling different and I feel judged almost for feeling the way I do right now. So just being with them and seeing what it is, but understanding that there's a lot behind the surface that we're not seeing, trying to make it that that person feels comfortable, then to share a little bit of that.
Obviously, that requires some form of connection or chemistry. We spoke a little bit about connection and things like that. How does the therapist build a connection with the client?
There can really be a comfort in the anonymity of talking to a complete stranger, where I can just have this kind of brain dump almost of putting anything that I'm feeling there.
Mm.
There's going to be no comeback. Nobody's going to change how they are in relationship with me. They're not going to talk to somebody else about it and say, well, did you know so and so was feeling that and said this to me? So, whilst it is a confronting thing, it can also be quite liberating.
So, what would you say to somebody that's doesn't want to go to therapy because they say I'm not good with expressing my feelings?
It's surprising how many people do come into therapy saying that, you know, almost apologizing, I have to excuse me, but I don't really know what I'm feeling. I don't know why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. And that's the whole point of, you know, kind of really just that exploration, you know, and I'm really conscious that the very people who say that they're not attuned to their feelings are actually incredibly self-aware. It's just that they haven't had the practice before. They haven't had the platform to be able to put words to it and say it out loud. It's all been there in their head. But knowing the agony of that as well, that they've been trapped and suffering in silence with all of that, there's a real kind of potency with when we say what we've been thinking. So many times we can be told that we're overthinkers. And the way I think about that is overthinkers are people who are doing the best they can. They want to talk perhaps to somebody, but haven't got the means to be able to do that. And then the only option then is to think about it yourself and try and make sense of it. But actually, there's research that says that saying things out loud, as it is in therapy, there, you hear your distress in a different way and can start to really develop a great deal of empathy for your situation versus kind of just thinking about this. And as humans, we're always very good at being critical of ourselves. There might be a degree of shame that I feel this way and I feel I shouldn't feel this way. And I'm annoyed that I've got this good thing going on in my life, but I can't fully appreciate it and absorb it.
You've supported people through trauma, addiction, bereavement, and relapse. What do those experiences have in common?
They're in pain, they're suffering, they're feeling alone in the world. And it can be for any number of things that they've gone through, like the examples that you just gave there. But really, just knowing that we need ways to cope with that. And sometimes we may have a great support network around us. Sometimes it's also about, despite having that really good support network, we protect them. So I'm thinking about my own experience when I went through a very complex bereavement at age 16. I wanted to protect the people around me, and it was important to me that they saw that I was okay. So I'd put on the smile and just deal with it behind the scenes.
How do you know when you're in pain?
Sometimes we might not completely know. So there can be that dissociation where there's a bit of a general numbness. I'm just kind of drifting through life and not actually feeling anything. And sometimes that might be because I haven't got capacity to connect with the pain. If I dial it up to 100% and really feel that, I've got a demanding job, I've got people who depend on me. It might be that kind of thing that's going through your mind and thinking, well, if I actually embrace that pain, there's fear of falling apart. So therapy is about connecting with it in a way that feels safe, where it's doing it gradually at a pace that is comfortable and actually, being able to explore it and heal those wounds as you go along.
Tell me about anger.
Anger is really interesting because society says we shouldn't be angry, and yet it's a very human emotion. And I'm thinking about how anger is almost a secondary thing. It's never just anger, it's often a lot of hurt, a lot of sadness that's not had space to go anywhere. So, it might be that somebody says something and that promotes a real kind of angry response from you because you feel really hurt by them, that in that moment they haven't seen you and valued you. And that's hurt you because that's told you something about yourself that triggers a nerve. It makes you feel not good enough. And you might feel very stuck as well in that situation where I feel not in control of my emotions and I don't like that. And now I'm being judged for being angry. And very often it can be that we don't have space to tell people. When you said that, I was really surprised that I felt X, Y, and Z. We can really sometimes just be afraid of upsetting the apple cart to the point where we'll just take it all on. And then it'll get to a point where somebody hasn't seen that what they've said actually disrespected that person, and then has now got to a point where it's this layer upon this layer upon this layer. And then it creates this angry response that then that person thinks the reaction to it is almost disproportionate. And
Mm.
then they judge that person, and then that person feels that shame.
Tell me about shame.
Mm. Shame is a huge area. It's something that cuts us off from all kinds of support. How we see ourselves is huge. Sometimes we can see ourselves as not being good enough, and that lack of self-esteem can also feed into this assumption that we deserve, or don't deserve a happy life or the chance to talk to somebody or to pay for therapy, that kind of thing there. But, I'm conscious that what we hold shame for. There's a reason why we've done certain things or said certain things or thought certain things. And it's about understanding that. Very often we're very good at judging ourselves for the action or the thing over here, but not thinking about the precursor to that. So what led up to that?
There's so many elements of our lives these days that cause fear, fear of this, fear of losing a job, fear of not having enough money to do that. How does fear come into the therapy space?
Fear is something that really holds us back, and anxiety is huge, especially these days. We lead very busy lives, and individuals in therapy can really just engage with what is holding them back. So these things that we fear may not even happen, but I think there's some crazy statistic out there about 80% or something like that of what we're worrying about doesn't come to fruition, but it's holding us back because it's now got me thinking about this and behaving in a certain way that means that I can't be in the moment and enjoy life.
Can someone heal even if they don't fully understand what's wrong?
So knowing that they're in pain but not knowing why and trying to heal from that, in exploring in therapy what that pain is about is really powerful. So it might be that, okay, so tell me a little bit more about what that pain is and what does that look like? What's been painful for you in your life? And this is where the professional being there with you is so helpful, because that congruence of sharing, well, when you said that, it made me think about that experience you shared with me last session about so and so and what that was like. So it's about the fact that these things can very often be hidden to the individual, but the professional, the therapist being there, will hear these things and see them in a way that can shine some light on it and help that individual to see it too.
How do you know you've been healed? How do you know when therapy is good enough to walk away?
I think when you feel good in your own skin, where you wake up in the morning and you're looking forward to that day, when somebody says, will you do this for me? And you've not got the reserves to, and you're able to say, actually, I'd love to, but I can't right now. And to be okay with that. Saying no can be such a hard thing for some people, and we can feel controlled by that fear of losing a friendship if I don't do this. So it's about having healthy boundaries. I think healed means I'm happy in my skin. I've got boundaries that I can put to protect myself.
What do you say to somebody that says, I don't have enough money to go to therapy?
If we know what therapy might do, then we might be able to put a value on it and realize that maybe that's worth the investment. It might be that the coping mechanisms of drinking or gambling or whatever it is are actually already hemorrhaging a great amount of money from you.
Childhood. What does childhood or how does childhood impact somebody's identity?
That's huge. So knowing that in childhood, from even before we are aware of what's going on around us, we get all sorts of messages and conditions of worth, they're called in the person-centered kind of field of therapy. Boys don't cry or man up, and these awful stigmas where very quickly that child learns to get by, to get that currency, that positive regard, that connection, which is the biggest thing that a child needs to feel connected. It might be that as a female, you're encouraged to be a good girl. And what that tells that young individual is you won't be accepted if you say that you don't like this or if you say no to somebody. So then perhaps that transpires that through life, then you find it hard to have boundaries, find it hard to say no to people because you've always been kind of conditioned that if you say no, bad things are going to happen, people aren't going to like you.
What kind of things do or have people told you after working with you that have stuck with you?
I think it brings to mind one thing in particular, and this person shared that, you might just have saved my life. It feels like that speaks volumes where we can really be holding on to stuff and really not have anybody to support us with that, but reaching out for support, making sure you've got the right support can be hugely powerful.
In that same light, if somebody listening is feeling like they're on the edge, what would you say to them?
So often people have thoughts of suicide, and just to know that those very scary thoughts are valid, knowing that it's not about I want to end my life. It's about I want to end the pain that I'm currently in. I want my situation to be different. So just to say at first, not to be scared, that those thoughts are understandable. That's almost your mind's way of trying to reassure yourself that there's some hope of something shifting and changing there because you're so saturated in that experience. But knowing that support is there is so important, that you're never needing to be on your own. There will always be someone there, whether it's Samaritans immediately at the end of the phone or a trained therapist to
Mm.
work with you in that.
What do you wish everyone knew about therapy?
I wish they knew that it would be a place where they would be seen, where they would be thought of really well, not judged, where there would be warmth and empathy, where it's not a space where that person's going to analyze you, say that you're wrong or broken or judge you for what you've done in the past, but just to completely see you as a human being doing the best you can with what you've had
Mm.
thrown at you.
So now we come to the favorite part of our podcast, which is the rapid fire questions. So, what's the most misunderstood thing about therapy?
I think sometimes some people have a belief that you can make things worse by talking about them. But knowing that these things are subconsciously bubbling under the surface anyway, you are aware of them, whether you're aware of that or not, if that makes sense. So actually engaging with them head on can be very freeing because they are already having an impact on your life, whether you are aware of that or not.
How does it feel as a therapist to see when somebody's finally being heard?
It feels incredible. And to see visibly the shackles falling from that person, in every sense of the word, that then they can say yes to all number of things that they it gives them the gift, they've given themselves the gift of not judging themselves.
What does depression actually look like in real life?
Depression is everything's harder, where things that once brought me joy, I don't feel anything from, perhaps, or the things that I have to do during the day take so much more energy. And depression really is that incredible way that your mind sends you warning signals that something isn't in alignment. I need to just take a long look at what's going on in my life because something isn't working for me.
Why is it that people say they're fine even though they're actually falling apart?
I think there can be a degree of hoping that that is the case and almost wanting to believe that. Then there might be a bit of denial there, which is understandable. And it also might be about trying to convince the other person, because again, it might be about protecting them that I am fine, or just the whole if I do stop and admit I'm not okay, I'm worried what that's going to look like.
What actually makes talking healing?
Being understood, being properly heard. And how many incidences in our daily lives can we actually say, yeah, I was properly understood there, where somebody gave me focus time, where it wasn't about me hearing their strife and distress and doing that reciprocal thing in a friendship, but it was just about in therapy, that's space for me.
What's a sign that you actually need therapy when everything's looking okay?
I think being dissatisfied, so not feeling that you know yourself. You might feel lost, you might feel stuck, you might feel numb, you might feel a range of very powerful emotions.
What should feeling good look like?
Feeling good should be I'm me, I like me, and I'm confident to be the person I want to be.
Why do people relapse, and what do they need when they actually do?
I think there's always a reason, just as when we think about why individuals adopt an addiction in the first place, there's always a reason, this before story that has led them to that. And a relapse is about something, again, that's happened that has been a very adverse experience where perhaps they haven't had the support that they've needed, and then they've needed that coping mechanism. So, really looking at that relapse with compassion rather than judging it.
What's the quietest red flag that you can pick up when somebody is struggling?
For me, it could even be somebody who's smiling, but they're not smiling with their eyes. There's almost a kind of forced mask there where there's a lot going on behind the surface. They look okay on the outside. It's that kind of egg analogy. We don't know by looking at an egg whether it's hard boiled on the inside or soft and runny. And just as we with with humans, it's the same. Even if somebody is wearing a smile, we can't take that as a given that they're okay.
In relation to therapy, what's a mask?
A mask is showing the world what you think they want to see. And that can drive us very far away from your organismic self, the person that you want to be, you truly are. And you're trying to be this shape-shifting individual where with one person you might be their version of what they like and completely different with another. And it's that kind of psychological distress that's, created because we're not in tune with our true selves.
What does it mean to be held emotionally?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. And I can feel myself smiling just thinking about that kind of very physical response to how precious that is to be in company with somebody who shows you positive regard no matter what you've done or what you've said. That's huge.
What role does compassion play in mental health?
I think compassion is the key. If we can have compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, then it takes us from shame and stigma and judgment and takes us to a place of understanding and empathy.
What actually is the hardest part about starting therapy in the eyes of a therapist?
So, in my eyes, it's about the individual finding the person they feel comfortable with. And so, I'd really encourage somebody who's thinking about therapy to connect with as many therapists as possible. Many therapists offer a free chemistry call where you can really get a sense in that time of who they are as a person, what it feels like to talk to them. But just to know that if you do have a negative experience, you've tried one session, it's not worked out, that it's not to say it won't work out with somebody else.
How do we know when healing is actually beginning?
When you start to feel differently, when there's a very different outlook on life, where daily tasks aren't chores, where you can get up out of bed, where you can take a shower without it taking all the energy you have that day.
What makes a client feel like they're truly safe?
I think knowing that they've said something and tested the water and it's been met with empathy and understanding and no judgment. It can be a thing that feels very surreal because it's something that perhaps some people don't experience a lot outside of therapy.
Excellence. Thank you very much, Sarah. This has been great.
Thanks for having me, Lars.
So, everyone, you can actually find Sarah. She's one of our therapists on the BookMe website, bookme.pro. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion and Q&A and got a lot out of it. Anyway, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.